It was early spring in Portland, Oregon. The air still held a trace of winter's chill, but the sunlight, softer and warmer each passing day, promised a shift in season. On the corner of Hawthorne Boulevard and 34th Avenue, in front of a faded brick storefront, stood a small figure that seemed out of place among the buzz of late afternoon traffic and the shuffle of pedestrians. 9-year-old Emily Carter stood with a white plastic bucket in her hands, filled with freshly picked daisies. The flowers were simple, their petals slightly uneven, their stems loosely bunched together with thin pieces of string. She wore a too-thin pink hoodie, sleeves pulled over her hands, and sneakers that had seen far better days. She didn't call out to passers-by or wave signs. She simply stood there, offering her flowers silently with a small, polite smile. Some adults glanced at her with fleeting curiosity, others with discomfort. A few stopped, rummaged through their wallets, and handed her a couple of dollars before walking away without taking any flowers. Others purchased a single stem out of pity or maybe guilt, offering her soft encouragement she barely acknowledged. But most passed her by as if she were part of the city's background noise. Michael Landon noticed her the first time by accident. He was walking home from his workshop a few blocks away, the scent of sawdust still clinging to his clothes. A local carpenter in his early 40s with kind eyes and rough hands, Michael had seen his share of oddities in the neighborhood. But something about Emily pulled at him. She wasn't begging. She wasn't loitering. She was simply there, deliberate, still and silent. He didn't approach her that day. He watched from across the street, standing beside a food cart, pretending to check his phone. She didn't look up often, but when she did, her expression was distant, not dreamy or hopeful, but more like someone watching a place they didn't belong to. Her gaze wasn't one of a child enjoying a spring afternoon. It was cautious, guarded. The next day, she was there again. Same spot, same bucket, same small, tight smile. Michael passed by closer this time, pretending to tie his boot near the curb. He noticed how she carefully wiped each flower stem before offering it, even though no one seemed to care about the dirt. She wore the same hoodie, the same jeans with the patched knees. There were no adults nearby, no one watching from a car or leaning out of a shop window. By the third day, Michael's concern had grown into a quiet obsession. He lingered longer than he meant to, watching from inside a coffee shop across the street. He sipped his drink slowly, pretending to be reading the paper, but his eyes never left her. Emily stayed for hours, rarely moving, except to adjust a bucket or gently offer a flower when someone slowed down. She never laughed. She never played. She never spoke unless spoken to. And then he saw it. As she turned away from a customer, her smile fading, her eyes drifted to the side, toward a group of school kids passing by with backpacks and lunch boxes. For just a second, her mask dropped. The emptiness in her expression hit Michael like a punch to the chest. It was the kind of look he'd seen in veterans in shelters, in eyes that had witnessed too much. That evening, he walked by intentionally, pretending to be in a rush. As he neared her, she offered a daisy wordlessly. He slowed but didn't stop. Instead, he met her gaze for just a moment and said, softly, "Maybe tomorrow." Her eyes flicked up to his, surprised, maybe even a little confused. Then she nodded once and returned to watching the street. Michael didn't sleep well that night. His mind spun with questions. Who was she? Why was she alone? Where did she go after sundown? He told himself it wasn't his place to get involved, that someone else surely knew about her. But deep down, he couldn't shake the image of her standing there, like a small ghost tethered to that street corner. He wasn't the type to meddle. Years of keeping to himself had made that easy. But something about Emily's silence felt louder than anything he had heard in years. So the next day, instead of walking by or watching from a distance, Michael made a different choice. He waited. He watched from the same coffee shop, careful not to draw attention. And when the late sun began to dip below the rooftops and Emily started gathering her flowers, he quietly followed her, not out of suspicion, out of instinct, out of a growing fear that something was very wrong. She moved with purpose, clutching the bucket tightly, crossing streets with practiced caution. Michael kept his distance, his heartbeat ticking louder with every block. He had no idea what he was about to uncover, only that whatever it was, it started here with a little girl, a bucket of daisies, and a silence too heavy for someone so young to carry. Emily left the sidewalk just as the sun dipped behind the buildings, the fading orange glow casting long shadows down the avenue. Her steps were small but deliberate, bucket of unsold daisies held close to her chest. She didn't look around, didn't pause to glance into shop windows or hesitate at intersections. Michael followed from half a block behind, keeping to the opposite side of the street. He told himself he wasn't being invasive, just watchful, just cautious. But deep down he knew he was crossing into something personal. Still, the image of her eyes from the day before haunted him, and that was reason enough not to turn back. She didn't take the main streets. Instead, she wove through side roads and alleyways, past vacant lots with overgrown weeds, past chain-link fences bowed in the middle from years of wind and misuse. She didn't stop once. No phone in her hand, no earbuds in her ears. Just the flowers and that quiet, fixed determination. 15 blocks later, she arrived at a neighborhood that looked like it had been forgotten by time. The streetlights here flickered, some completely dead. The sidewalks were cracked, the grass along the curbs uncut and strewn with litter. Michael slowed his pace as she turned onto a narrow side street, nearly hidden by a leaning wooden fence. There were only a few houses here, all of them run down. Some had boards on the windows. One had a front door missing entirely. She walked up to a small, sagging house with peeling blue paint and a busted gutter that hung like a broken limb. Instead of using the front door, Emily glanced around once, just once, then slipped through a narrow space between the fence and the wall, vanishing behind the structure. Michael crossed the street, careful not to crunch the gravel under his boots too loudly. From the sidewalk, he couldn't see much beyond the overgrown hedges and a rusted swing set that leaned dangerously to one side. Curiosity tightened in his chest. He moved closer to the edge of the fence, just enough to peer through a small gap in the boards. The backyard was more telling than the front. A clothesline sagged between two trees, and on it hung tiny shirts and socks, all worn thin from overuse. Nearby sat a metal shopping cart, overflowing with plastic bags, some torn, some tied shut. It wasn't just clutter, it was survival. Then he saw her again, through a side window partially blocked by a curtain. She was inside now, the bucket set down by what looked like a kitchen table. No lights were on. The room was dim, shadows crowding corners. Emily moved through the space with practiced ease, opening a cupboard, removing a chipped mug, and pouring water into it from a jug. Her movements were precise, not like a child playing house, but like someone who had done this routine far too many times. She glanced toward the back of the house, where a narrow hallway led to what Michael assumed were the bedrooms. Suddenly, a small sound caught his attention, a wheezing cough, faint but sharp, coming from the same direction Emily had looked. His chest tightened. He took a step back from the fence, unsure what he'd just heard, but certain it came from someone else inside. Not an adult, a child. He left quickly, retracing his steps through the neighborhood, his thoughts louder than the gravel beneath his boots. He didn't sleep that night. He kept replaying what he'd seen, the cautious way she entered the house, the silence within, the sound of that cough. Whatever she was hiding in there, it wasn't something she could handle alone. The next day, she wasn't at the usual spot. Michael arrived early, sat on the same bench near the coffee shop, and waited for hours. But Emily never came, nor the next day. Her absence filled him with unease. Something had changed, and the weight of it settled in his gut. On the third day of her disappearance, Michael couldn't stay idle anymore. He returned to the Blue House, this time in broad daylight. He walked up the cracked path, stood on the crooked porch, and knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. He stepped off the porch and moved around to the side, where a wooden gate hung loosely on rusted hinges. He eased it open and entered the backyard. Everything was as he remembered. The clothesline, the swing set, the shopping cart. But now, the window was slightly ajar. From inside came that same cough, weaker this time. He approached cautiously, leaned toward the opening, and spoke in a low voice. "Emily, it's Michael, from a flower stand." There was a long pause, then a rustle, feet scuffing the floor. And finally, her voice, quiet, tight, as if she hadn't spoken in days. "How did you find us?" "I followed you," he admitted gently. "I wanted to make sure you got home safe. Are you okay?" Another pause. Then, slowly, she appeared at the window, her face pale and wary. She didn't open the window wider, but she didn't shut it either. "She's sick," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who is?" "My sister, Sophie. She has a fever. I don't know what to do." Michael's heart dropped into his stomach. The cough, the tiny clothes, the shopping cart. It all made sense now. He didn't push the window. He just stood there, hands in his jacket pockets, waiting. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. Emily hesitated, then nodded. She disappeared for a moment, and he heard the shuffling of furniture being moved. Moments later, the back door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something sour, unwashed laundry perhaps, or the remnants of old food. The kitchen was small, barely furnished. A single pot sat on the stove. No lights were on, even though it was already starting to grow dark again. Michael followed Emily down the hallway to a tiny bedroom with a bare mattress in the corner. A child no older than 4 lay curled up under 2 mismatched blankets. Her cheeks were flushed with heat, her forehead beaded with sweat. She stirred as they entered, coughing weakly. "Sophie," Emily said, kneeling beside her. "It's okay. He's nice." Michael stood in the doorway, unsure if he should step further. His eyes met Emily's, and something in her expression shifted. Less guarded, more desperate. "She hasn't eaten today," she murmured. "I was going to go out again tomorrow. Sell more flowers. Buy soup. Medicine." Michael didn't speak right away. He looked around the room, at the walls with their peeling wallpaper, the cracked window, the pile of newspapers in the corner. No toys, no books, just necessity. "You've been taking care of her all by yourself?" he asked finally. Emily nodded, her lips pressed tight. "Since Mama left, 2 weeks ago. Maybe more. She said she'd come back. She didn't." He knelt beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. She didn't flinch, but she didn't lean in either. "You shouldn't have to do this alone," he said. Emily blinked quickly, as if forcing tears back. "I don't want them to take Sophie away," she said. "If they find out, they'll put us in different homes. I heard them say that at school once." Michael didn't have the answers. Not yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't walking away this time. The cold inside the house lingered despite the late afternoon sun, filtering through the cracked windows. The wooden floor creaked under Michael's boots as he stood in the narrow hallway, uncertain whether to go back to the kitchen or remain by the bedroom door. Emily had pulled a chair close to Sophie's mattress, tucking the blankets tighter around her sister's small frame. She moved with the kind of patience that didn't belong to a 9-year-old, her thin fingers brushing damp strands of hair off Sophie's forehead, pausing every now and then to listen for the labored breathing beneath the wheezing coughs. Michael finally turned toward the kitchen, opening cabinets gently. Most were bare. A few held canned beans, 1 box of cereal, and a half-full jar of peanut butter. The fridge hummed weakly but offered little more. Just a bottle of water, a slice of bread wrapped in paper towel, and 2 small apples. The hunger in that house was palpable, not just from what was missing, but from how everything had been stretched. The cereal box had been folded and taped shut to preserve every crumb. In the living room, he found a small heater tucked behind a broken armchair. It had a bent plug, but the wiring looked safe. He brought it to the bedroom and plugged it into the wall, adjusting it to blow softly in Sophie's direction. Emily watched in silence, her eyes fixed on the glowing orange coils. When the warmth began to spread through the room, a subtle shift in her expression appeared, just enough to register relief, though her shoulders remained tight. "You found the heater," she whispered. "I tried using it once, but it makes the lights flicker." Michael nodded, just for a little while, to warm her up. He knelt beside Sophie again, checking her forehead. Still warm, but not burning. "How long has she been like this?" 3 days, Emily said. "I gave her Tylenol, but there's only a little left, and I don't think it's working anymore." "Where did you get it?" A lady at the gas station. I asked her if she had any extra. She gave me half a bottle. Said it was from her purse. Michael didn't ask more. The implications were too heavy. Instead, he stood and looked around the bedroom, taking note of the details. There was no dresser, just a few clothes folded in a milk crate. On the wall above the mattress, someone had drawn flowers with crayon, rough daisies, shaky sunflowers. He didn't need to ask who had done them. "I'll bring more medicine tomorrow," he said, "and food. But first, I need to ask something." Emily turned toward him, suddenly alert. "I won't call anyone if you don't want me to," he added quickly. "But I need to understand what happened to your mom. Did she leave a note? Say where she was going." Emily lowered her gaze, fiddling with the frayed end of her sleeve. She said she was going to the hospital. She said her chest hurt and she couldn't breathe right. I think she was scared. "Did she ever come back?" She shook her head. "I waited 2 nights. Then I had to start taking care of everything. I thought maybe she'd call, but the phone doesn't work anymore." Michael exhaled slowly. He didn't press. Emily's voice had begun to quiver. He could see how hard she was fighting to keep her composure, to appear strong. She had been surviving in silence, bearing the weight of responsibility with no guidance, no support, just instinct and fear. "Have you talked to anyone else? A neighbor? A teacher?" "They'd ask questions," she said. "Then someone would take Sophie. I heard them talking at school one time about a boy whose mom got arrested. They split him and his baby brother up. I can't let that happen." Michael leaned against the wall, his mind racing. He wanted to protect her, both of them. But he also knew that the longer this continued without intervention, the greater the danger, especially for Sophie. The girl was small, undernourished, and clearly battling a fever that wasn't breaking. He stayed another hour. He boiled water in the dented kettle to make tea, though they had no tea bags. Instead, he gave Emily warm water with sugar, and she drank it slowly while sitting by the heater. Sophie stirred once or twice, murmuring something incoherent, and Emily was always quick to soothe her. The bond between them was fragile but powerful, forged not just by blood but by necessity. Before he left, Michael reached into his coat and pulled out 2 protein bars and a small pack of tissues. He set them on the kitchen table without saying much, knowing pride could be a heavy burden for children who have been forced into roles they never asked for. "If she gets worse tonight," he said gently, "I want you to promise you'll come find me. You know where my workshop is." Emily nodded. "On Stark Street, with a big window in front." "That's right. Don't wait too long, okay?" "I won't." He didn't believe her, not entirely. She was too used to hiding, to managing things alone. She'd already proven that. Still, he had to try. The next morning before sunrise, Michael drove to the nearest grocery store and filled 2 bags, bread, canned soup, a thermometer, children's fever medication, juice boxes, and extra blankets from the clearance aisle. He didn't know if Emily would even let him back in, but he had to try. When he returned to the house, he knocked again. This time, she answered immediately. Her eyes were tired, but less wary. She stepped aside, letting him in without a word. Sophie was still asleep, but her breathing was steadier. The heater had been moved closer to her bed. Michael set the bags down and began unpacking, explaining what each item was and how to use it. Emily listened carefully, nodding. She asked how to read the thermometer and whether it was okay to give Sophie both the medicine and the juice together. Her concern was not just sincere, it was meticulous. As Michael knelt beside the mattress again, Sophie opened her eyes slightly and stared at him. She didn't speak, but her gaze held curiosity rather than fear. Emily noticed. "She doesn't talk to people she doesn't know," she said, "but she's listening." Michael smiled, softly. "That's good enough for me." Over the next hour, he explained how to portion the soup, how to store the medicine, and how to check Sophie's temperature properly. Emily listened with the focus of someone twice her age. Before he left again, she followed him to the door. "Are you going to tell anyone?" she asked. He paused. "Not yet," he said, "but I'm going to find someone who can help without breaking you 2 apart. Do you trust me?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. Just once. It was all he needed. 3 days passed with subtle rhythm, developing between Michael and the girls. Each morning, he arrived at the small blue house with something useful: food, clean clothes, medicine, sometimes just warmth in the form of his steady presence. Emily had stopped questioning his visits. Her initial caution gave way to a quiet acceptance, though her eyes still flicked toward the windows whenever a car slowed on the street. She remained alert, always scanning for threats she couldn't name, but deeply feared. Michael never stayed too long, careful not to cross an invisible line, but he made sure she knew he wasn't leaving. Sophie improved gradually. Her fever broke on the second day, and though she remained weak and silent, she sat up the first time on a Thursday morning, wrapped in one of the new blankets Michael had brought. Emily fed her soup spoon by spoon, patient and deliberate. Michael stood at the doorway, watching the small moment unfold like a fragile miracle. The relief in Emily's shoulders was almost imperceptible, but he saw it. Despite the progress, Michael's unease grew. The fragility of the situation was undeniable. The house remained unfit for children. Exposed wires in the hallway, windows that barely closed, and a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink that left a sour puddle on the floor. If the wrong person saw it, there would be no leniency. The girls would be taken, evaluated, separated in a matter of hours. He knew the system. He had watched it fail more times than it helped. He returned home that evening and sat in his darkened kitchen, dinner untouched, his hands gripping a folder he retrieved from a cabinet in the back of his workshop. Inside were clippings, old emails, and phone numbers from years ago when he'd briefly volunteered for a foster outreach program. He hadn't stayed long. Too many walls, too much bureaucracy. But one name in the folder still stood out: Lydia Hart, a child welfare caseworker who had once told him, without hesitation, "If you ever see something that feels wrong, call me directly, not the hotline." Me. The next morning, Michael dialed the number. Lydia's voice answered on the second ring, sharp, alert, and unchanged by time. "Lydia Hart. It's Michael Landon. We met a few years ago through the foster program. I remember. You built those shelves for our office." "Yeah," he said, pausing. "Listen, I need your help. I found something. Or someone, actually. 2 little girls. One's sick. The other's been caring for her alone since their mother vanished. Where are they now? With me? Kind of. I mean, I've been checking in, bringing supplies. They're staying in a condemned house, completely on their own. No adults. No electricity in some rooms. It's bad, Lydia. But if I report this the usual way, they'll be separated." Lydia finished, her voice tight with understanding. "Do you know their names?" "Emily and Sophie Carter. The older one is 9. The younger one's maybe 4. There was silence on the line. Papers shuffled. "Carter," Lydia said. "We have a past incident tied to that name. The mother, Rachel Carter, was flagged for neglect 2 years ago. A neighbor reported her leaving the girls alone. The case was closed after she completed a parent training course." Michael's jaw tensed. She'd been gone for over a week now. No calls. No sign of her. "I'll need to come see them," Lydia said. "But if you're willing, I can try to file this as a kinship support situation. That way we don't initiate full foster care protocol right away. Can you meet me at the house tomorrow?" Michael agreed and hung up, anxiety curling in his stomach. He didn't know how Emily would react. Didn't know if she'd even open the door with a stranger in tow. But this had to be done, carefully, quietly, and with every promise kept. That evening, he prepared the girls gently. Sitting across from Emily at the small kitchen table, he explained the situation in plain terms. "There's someone I trust. Her name is Lydia. She works with families like yours, not to take kids away, but to help them stay together." Emily stared at him, unmoving. "She's not like the others?" she asked finally. "No," he said. "She's different. I wouldn't bring her here if I didn't believe that. She won't put us in different houses. She gave me her word. She wants to meet you both, talk, and see if we can make this work without the system stepping in." Emily's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. After a long pause, she nodded once, not in agreement, but in surrender. Michael hated how much that gesture resembled defeat. The next day, Lydia arrived just after noon. She was in her 40s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a loose braid and a long wool coat that looked out of place in the neighborhood. She brought a soft canvas bag filled with food, flashlights, and coloring books. No clipboard, no uniform, just kindness carried in quietly. Emily opened the door cautiously, Sophie clinging to her leg. Lydia knelt without speaking and offered the younger girl a small stuffed animal. Sophie took it slowly, then pressed her face into Emily's side. "I'm Lydia," the woman said gently. "Can I come in?" Michael stepped in from behind. "It's okay. She's here to help." Inside, Lydia moved with the grace of someone who had seen worse. She didn't flinch at the peeling paint or the broken floorboards. She didn't ask why the power was out in half the rooms. She just knelt near Sophie's mattress, asked her name, and complimented the crayon flowers on the wall. Emily watched every move. After an hour, Lydia asked Emily to sit with her alone. Michael stayed in the kitchen, pretending to busy himself with the groceries while listening to the soft murmur of their voices. Emily answered quietly at first, then more confidently as the conversation grew. When Lydia finally stood, she found Michael by the window. "You were right," she said. "They're strong, but this can't go on like it is. What happens now?" "I'll fast-track a kinship placement under emergency support. It means you take temporary guardianship. We avoid foster system entry, and they stay together." Michael blinked. "Me? You're the only adult they trust. You've already done more than most would. With the right paperwork, we can make it official until we locate the mother or determine a more permanent solution." Michael didn't speak for a moment. The responsibility pressed heavily on his chest, but so did something else, something quieter and older, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. "I'll do it," he said, "whatever it takes." The transition was neither instant nor smooth. Paperwork moved slowly, even with Lydia's help, and there were days when the weight of it all pressed hard on Michael's shoulders. He had never considered guardianship before, let alone for two young girls who had grown used to surviving in the shadows of neglect and fear. But once he agreed, there was no turning back. Not morally, not emotionally. Lydia kept her word, ensuring that Emily and Sophie remained together under a temporary kinship placement that allowed Michael to act as their legal guardian while keeping them out of the state system. It was a delicate arrangement, and the conditions were clear. Regular check-ins, proof of stability, and immediate reporting if the mother reappeared. Michael moved the girls into his house within the week. It wasn't a large home, a modest two-bedroom craftsman on the edge of Portland's east side, but it was clean, warm, and safe. He gave the girls a larger bedroom, repainting the walls in soft pastels, and letting Emily choose new bedding and curtains. Sophie was too young to express preferences beyond colors and stuffed animals, but Emily's taste was thoughtful and simple. Light blues, daisies on the pillowcases, and a single picture frame for the nightstand that she said she'd fill later when things felt more normal. The first few days were awkward. Emily still packed her belongings tightly in her backpack every night, as if unsure whether they'd be asked to leave the next morning. Sophie followed her sister everywhere, refusing to be more than a few feet away even during naps. They ate slowly, quietly, often waiting for permission before taking seconds. Michael never rushed them. He kept his routine steady, cooked breakfast every morning, and came home early from the workshop in the evenings. He made space for them without fanfare, letting them learn the shape of this new life on their own terms. It was Emily who started the garden. One Saturday morning, while Michael was sanding down an old bookshelf in the garage, Emily appeared with a small cardboard box in her hands. Inside were the last remaining daisies from Blue House, wilted but not yet dead. She asked for a shovel, and without waiting for help, began digging a patch in the backyard near the fence. Michael watched her from the window as she worked silently, her small body bent over the earth with focused determination. Later, when he brought her a glass of lemonade, she looked up at him and said, "These were the first ones. I think they should go here." He nodded. They belong here now. Over the next few weeks, the small patch expanded. Emily added seeds, some they bought together at the hardware store, others given to her by neighbors who began to notice the quiet girl tending a growing garden behind the fence. Sophie helped too, in her own way, watering the soil with a plastic cup, patting the dirt with her hands, sitting in the grass and talking softly to the plants as if they could hear her. It became a ritual. Every morning before breakfast and every evening after dinner, the girls visited the garden. Michael built a small bench nearby, where he would sit and listen to Emily talk about what she learned about flowers, the names, the colors, the way they turned toward the sun. She began writing their progress in a notebook, sketching each plant as it sprouted. One afternoon, she showed him a drawing labeled Emily's Daisies for Survivors. It was a rough sketch, but it carried a weight he understood deeply. The house grew louder in the best ways. Sophie began to speak more often, her voice still soft but no longer fearful. She called Michael Mikey at first, then slowly transitioned to Uncle Mike, which he never corrected. Emily started leaving her backpack by the door instead of taking it to bed. She invited a friend from school to visit the garden, then another. The yard, once overgrown and empty, became a haven of laughter, roots, and color. Lydia continued her visits, always discreet, always with a smile. She documented their progress, offered advice, and slowly started the process of evaluating Michael for full guardianship. It wasn't something he had considered initially, but as the days turned into months, the idea took root just like Emily's garden had. When Lydia finally brought the papers for permanent adoption, he didn't hesitate. The hearing took place on a rainy morning in late October. Michael wore his best button-down shirt, Emily a pale yellow dress with a daisy pin she'd made herself. Sophie clutched her stuffed animal the entire time. The judge was kind, if procedural, and after a brief review of Lydia's reports and Michael's petition, the decision was made. Just like that, it was official. Michael Landon was no longer just their guardian. He was their father. They didn't celebrate with cake or balloons. Instead, Emily asked to stop by a nursery on the way home. She picked out a new flower, lavender this time, and planted it beside the daisies that afternoon. Sophie added a rock painted with 3 stick figures, holding hands under a sun. Michael sat on the bench and watched them, the garden full now, not just of flowers, but of belonging. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Michael sat at the kitchen table, the legal documents beside him. He traced their names with his finger. Emily Carter Landon, Sophie Carter Landon. The silence in the house was no longer heavy or hollow. It was peaceful. Outside, the garden swayed gently in the wind, a living reminder where they had come from and how far they had grown. It wasn't just a patch of soil. It was a story told through roots and petals, through trust earned and love quietly planted. And in that garden, every bloom whispered the same truth. Home was where you started. It was where someone stayed.